Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for some more Escape From Tarkov solo gameplay tips for all those lone wolf PMCs out there, and anyone looking to improve their game and show up their squad mates. Solo gameplay in Tarkov offers a lot of challenges. You're always outnumbered, you've got blind spots everywhere you aren't actively looking, and you're often stuck into vulnerable positions like looting with nobody to watch your six. It's tough, it's stressful, but it's also extremely satisfying to make good plays as a lone wolf and come out of raids with fat bags full of loot and tons of experience, since you get to take your pick of everything you can find and you have first dibs on all the kills. I've spent the vast majority of my time in Tarkov as a solo player, and in this video series I talk about some of the tips, tricks, and strategies that I use to succeed as a lone wolf and make big plays and bigger profits. While these tips are focused on the solo player experience, they can also be applied when playing as a squad. The trick is, every player needs to improve on their own before a squad can improve as a whole. Just before I get into the first tip in this video, I wanted to give a shout out to my two newest Kill a Tier patrons, Wesley Minton and Soviet Lovehammer. Thanks for the support, guys, I really appreciate it. So with that intro out of the way, let's take a look at some tips for solo players that should help keep you alive and get you to exfil safely. First up, let's take a look at some things you can do before you even load into a raid that might be a pretty big deciding factor in whether you live or die. The freedom you have in Escape From Tarkov to micromanage your loadout is almost unmatched, and players have an extremely wide variety of choices for not only their weapons, but also armor, gear, clothing, and supplies. A lot of what you bring is based on personal preference, your current economy status, and your level. It's best to bring gear you're comfortable with, and I would never recommend blowing all your money to buy gear that you can't afford to lose. Another factor that I think you should always take into account when selecting gear though is the map that you're planning to load into, and one step deeper, what your overall goal is for that raid. Each map in Escape From Tarkov is vastly different in terms of size, terrain features, and layout. Some maps are claustrophobic and extremely close quarters, while others are wide open and more suited to mid-range fighting with magnified scopes. Some maps have huge open areas with little cover, and others are packed with dense buildings and narrow alleyways. In some ways, those differences in terrain and layout are going to give an edge to players with certain gear and give a disadvantage to others. To make an obvious example, a player with a scoped sniper rifle is going to have an easier time on woods or shoreline because the open terrain and concealment let them play to the strengths of a precision rifle. That same player is going to have a significantly harder time making their sniper work well on factory or labs because the size and layout of the map take away all the advantages of a long-range weapon. It's not impossible to make it work, but you'd have a way easier time with a CQB focused kit. The same thought process applies to gear and armor as well, especially after the weight system was introduced and players suffer huge penalties from being too heavy. The bigger the map, the more you're going to have to move, and the more vulnerable you're going to be while you move. With that in mind, lightweight, high mobility gear is the best choice on big maps so you can move quickly from one place to the next. On the flip side, a small map like factory or labs might require you to gear up a little bit and wear heavier armor. You don't want to be lugging around 60 kilograms of gear when you spawn in the middle of a field on shoreline, because while you're huffing and puffing to get to the top of the next hill, a guy in a lightweight plate carrier has already beat you to it and is now sighting down on you. To make a long story short, think about what type of weapons and gear will work best for the map you're going to play, and avoid using gear that doesn't make sense for the situation if you can. The next tip I have for you is a bit more abstract than the last one, and it's all about picking your timing properly when you're going to engage another player. When you lay eyes on another PMC, it can be very tempting to immediately try and take the first shot that you can potentially make. A lot of the time, that's the right play, and sometimes you're only going to get that one shot, so it makes sense to take it. However, a lot of times the simple act of waiting 1 or 2 seconds before you pull the trigger can swing the odds in your favor by letting you spot something you might have missed by pulling the trigger too early. For example, waiting a second on your shot can let you spot the rest of their squad, and potentially let them all move out of cover before you start shooting, making it more likely you can take them all by surprise. You also might notice that they're fighting other players, or that they've already killed some other players and are moving in to start looting. If you just wait a few seconds for them to crouch down and start searching, you have an incredibly simple shot to make, and that makes your life much easier. Another part of this tip is that if at all possible, you should wait until you have the best possible shot before you give your position away. It can be hard to stay patient when you're scoped in on another player, but if you wait to fire until you have a guaranteed hit, you can skip the stress of a gunfight and move straight on to looting. For tip number 3 in this video, I'm going to be giving credit to my comment section for bringing this up literally every time I make a PvP tips video. There's always one more guy, so always act like there's one more guy, and then you won't be surprised when there is one more guy. Just like the previous tip, This one is all about patience and timing, but this time the patience is required after the fight, not before it. Once you drop an enemy, whether they be a player, a scab, or a boss, your natural first instinct is to run over there and collect your hard-earned booty. I get it, loot is awesome, and when you see a dead guy with a nice airframe helmet, you really want that bad boy to be sitting in your backpack. The problem is, the more eager you are for loot, the more likely you are to end up as just another lump in a big pile of dead bodies. When that happens, it's almost a bigger disappointment than straight up losing the fight in the first place, because you had your fingers practically touching that loot before it was just taken from your grasp. With this in mind, take just a few seconds after you make a kill to scout the surroundings, listen carefully, and figure out if there's someone else creeping around. You don't need to crawl in a 360-degree perimeter for 10 minutes, just scan, move a bit, and listen carefully. More often than not, the other player will give themselves away first because they just want to get out of there, and you'll usually keep the advantage in the fight. Taking this same idea into account, even after you've cleared the area and get started looting, keep your ears open and don't linger for too long. Chances are, someone heard the fight you just got into, and you've got to assume someone is coming to investigate. At the end of the day, even if there isn't another player hanging around, if you always play like there is, you won't be surprised when they show up. Next up, I've got a tip that isn't always going to work out, but when it does, it's a crafty trick that most players won't expect, and can lead to you getting some real easy kills on unsuspecting PMCs. Scavs are dangerous, and you should never underestimate how deadly they can be if you give them the chance. However, as both a player and as a player scab, you can sort of use AI scavs as a PMC detector, like a semi-intelligent roaming security system. The idea is that if you see a patrolling scab that hasn't detected you, if you let them live, they will point out the location of the next PMC that wanders into their detection range. Then, you will both know where that player is, and be able to fight them while they're distracted dealing with the scavs. This works best on large maps as a PMC, because any scavs close to you will likely aggro on you once you are in range. On maps like Shoreline, Woods, Reserve, and Interchange, you can often see roaming scavs at popular areas from a secure vantage point before they detect you. Some of the best scavs to use for this purpose are the sniper scavs up on rooftops. If you set yourself where they can't see, they'll keep watch for PMCs, and then you can see where they're looking and shooting when they spot another player. As a player scab, this trick is even more effective, because the AI scavs are your buddies. You can hide yourself in very sneaky spots around your scab brothers, and when a PMC takes aggro, you have plenty of opportunity to ambush them. This is sometimes tricky to pull off, but you feel like an evil genius when it works out for you. Scavs aren't something you show mercy for, but when they can work for you, sometimes it's alright to prolong their end by a few minutes. The last tip in this video is about movement and positioning, picking areas to fight from or move through that don't leave you trapped, and knowing when to bail on a situation. As a solo player, your number one disadvantage is that you're alone, and therefore always outnumbered. You can use this to your advantage in some ways, but it can also quickly become a major problem when you run into multiple enemies at once. One of the biggest dangers comes from being surrounded, and giving an enemy team long enough to cut off your flanks or send someone behind you is almost always a death sentence, unless you get lucky and they conveniently come at you one at a time. With this in mind, you should try and move through areas that give you a good chance to double back or reposition, and when you pick a spot to fight from, look for a place that has an exit point that you can quickly leave from and get to a safer spot. When moving across the map, this means you should try to avoid open areas with little cover, and when possible, keep something like a wall, a shoreline, or terrain feature like a cliff blocking one of your flanks, so you don't have to watch every direction at once. It's also good to keep close to some form of concealment like trees or the crest of a hill. That way, if you get into a fight and feel outnumbered, you can disappear into the forest or behind the hill and reposition while they're still focusing on your old location. In large buildings, it's also good to learn the layout and find ways to move through them without taking the long, obvious hallways. It's not always possible, but if you can take a sneakier route, do it. When you found yourself an area you want to post up or see some players and you're looking to ambush them, you should use this same thinking. Try and look for a spot that has good cover from the direction you expect to take fire from, and some kind of a way for you to retreat and reposition if things go south in a hurry. If you have concealment or cover from behind to avoid getting shot in the back, that's even better. You won't always find the perfect spot, but use your best judgment and just try to avoid picking a fight while you're standing out in the open. Well, that about covers it for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you find some of these tips helpful. Just because of how games flow in Tarkov, you never truly know where to expect danger, and you've got to be always thinking about what the best move would be if shit hits the fan in the next 5 seconds. I've got links to my Twitch stream down below if you want to drop by and catch some raids, as well as links to my Twitter, Discord server, and Patreon page if you want to consider supporting the channel. Thanks for checking out the video. As always, feel free to leave any comments, corrections, or suggestions down below, and until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.